I had a coworker reach out to me and ask me if I could look into a problem he had with his Echo chainsaw. I'm pretty sure you know what the answer was. To tell you the truth, I thought it wasn't going to be this easy, as most of the time it turns out the saw is pretty much worn out, but in this case it turns out the problem was staring me in the face. What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by. Today's project is this Echo chainsaw, and the problem is that I can't get any tension on the chain, which pretty much makes this chainsaw unusable. I don't have a lot of information on this saw, except it does get used seasonally for firewood and some small jobs here and there. To be honest, it's in great condition and it doesn't appear to have been abused, just used. The air filter cover and filter are missing, but I won't worry about that till we fix the main problem. Now, I'm going to try and repair this chainsaw, however, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. Now, I do know that this saw isn't very old. In fact, it's only a couple of years old, and that's the reason why it's in decent condition. It's only ever been used by the owner, so there's very little chance for someone else to use it incorrectly. However, later on in the video, you'll see that the chances of it being used incorrectly are still pretty good. As you can see, the chain is completely loose, which is why it's unusable. They didn't mention the extent of the problem, but it's pretty obvious what we need to look at, which is the tensioning system, and see if there's a problem there. It's part of the side cover and the chain brake assembly, so we'll need to remove the bar nuts to get to it. Just out of curiosity, I do want to check the fuel tank, partially out of safety as well, and it looks as though it's completely full. That means they were meaning to use this chainsaw the last time it was taken out, until they couldn't get the slack out of the chain. At least we know that we have plenty of fuel to test with if we figure out what happened to it. After getting the cover off the saw, I'm going to try and turn the screw for the adjuster, and as you can see, it seems to be moving the piece that engages the bar, which is kind of strange that it won't work to put tension on the chain. I'm going to flip it around and see what it looks like on the other side. So on the other side of the screw is a cone-shaped gear that's supposed to spin another cone gear, and as that gear spins, it will turn the shaft and moves the pin that engages the bar backwards and forward to adjust the tension on the chain. The only problem is that the plastic piece that holds the second cone gear only supports the gear, it doesn't brace it. That's the job of the orange plastics behind it, but as you can see, it looks like they've given way and is allowing the gear to move away from the other gear. What that means is that when there's real pressure on it, it doesn't work to turn the shaft, versus when there's no pressure on it, it seems to work just fine. Now, there are a couple of options to try and fix the plastics, but I don't think it'll be as permanent and as good as just replacing it. Next, I'm going to remove the pieces for the tensioner and examine them for any damage. We might be able to just replace the cover and not the whole assembly. After removing the tensioner assembly, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it, but if we take a closer look at it, I don't think the cone gear is supposed to look like this, which means it needs to be replaced. If this gear looks like this, the other cone gear should look bad as well, but surprisingly, it doesn't look as bad as the other one. So this is a close-up of the plastics that are supposed to brace this second gear, and as you can see, it's supposed to be straight, but it's bulging, which isn't allowing good contact with the other gear. Now, if this was my saw, I'd probably try some sort of repair, but because it's not, I'm not going to try it. It also looks like the other end of the assembly that supports the top of the shaft is also damaged as well. I wasn't sure how it could have been damaged to this extent, but it'll make more sense later on as how this happened. Since the plastics are damaged, along with the tensioner, the only thing that makes sense is to replace the entire assembly, which I hate to say wasn't cheap, but considering the purchase price for this chainsaw is over $400, it's well worth it. Unfortunately, that won't be the only thing we have to replace on it. So here's the no OEM part, and I think it was about $60, which sounds like a lot of money, but the problem is that we couldn't find one at a cheaper price, but at least we know we won't have to worry about a quality issue. Before I open the bag, I'm going to compare it to the original one, that way if we have to send it back, they won't think we gave them back the broken one. Now, after looking at it for a minute, I'm pretty certain it's the same part and should work just fine. Since we have a brand new part, we can also see what the plastics are supposed to look like. As you can see, it's not bulging like the original one, so that was definitely the reason why the tensioner assembly wasn't working like it was supposed to. While the cover is off, I want to remove the chain and inspect the sprocket, which is part of the clutch drum. I want to see just how much wear is on it, and I hate to say it, but it's got a fair amount of wear on it already. However, my coworker said they don't want to worry about it right now, and to be honest, I believe the reason must have been a budget issue. Now, while I was working on his saw, they ordered and sent me all the parts that needed to be replaced. The combination of the cover, bar, chain, air filter, and its cover must have been well over $130, which, depending on your financial situation, could be a lot to pay for parts on a chainsaw. It's not my place to question their financial situation, just to fix stuff for my friends, family, and coworkers. Now, when replacing the chain, make sure it's facing the right direction, because if you're not paying attention, you could put it on backwards. If you do put it on backwards, I think you would know when making your first cut, because it's not going to cut very well. After the chain is on, I'm going to take the slack out of it by pulling the bar forward. Now, the hole in the bar that the pin engages with is right under the stud, so what I'm going to do is turn the screw on the adjuster to move the pin under the opening for it. You don't need to do it this way, but I find it easier to install the cover when the pin is close to where it needs to be. Once the cover is on, I'm going to install the bar nuts finger tight, but loose enough that I can still adjust it. Now, lifting up and forward on the end of the bar will also make it easier to install the nuts. Next step is to turn the adjuster while still holding the end of the bar up. According to the owner's manual, you want to make sure the chain has a lot of tension on it, but loose enough that you can move the chain along the bar. After that, you can tighten the bar nuts. I'm going to tell you how this tensioner got damaged. You can only turn the adjuster after loosening the bar nuts, and for some reason my coworker didn't loosen them and proceeded to try to turn the adjuster with the bar fixed in place. The bar didn't move, and the only thing that did was the shaft, which drove it into the plastics, which of course damaged it. The last thing we need to do is replace the air filter and its cover. I didn't ask them what happened to the original one or if they tried to use the saw without a filter and cover. I hope they didn't, otherwise they could have damaged the engine. Now, once the cover is back on the engine, the last thing we need to do is try and start it and make some practice cuts if it does start. I don't know when it was last started, so this might be a bit of a challenge. So it looks like it didn't have too much of a problem starting, but at least the cutting went well, which will make my coworker happy. It also looks like I need to adjust the chain again, but I think that was my fault for not making it tight enough the first time. So another option as to why this chain tensioner wasn't working to keep the chain tight against the bar is a worn out shaft that the pin rides on. The threads might be worn out on it and it's not able to stay in place. The fix would be to replace the tensioner. So my question is, would you have changed the worn drive sprocket on the clutch drum, or would you have just waited to see if it was really needed after doing this repair? Like I said, money plays a huge part in the decision-making process, and I'm not going to make that decision for them. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.